I'm going to be talking about commodity buffer stocks. That was also part of Keynes's original proposal in 1941. He had a series of ideas. The ICU was the core, but that ICU would also contribute to financing the stabilization of individual commodities. And it's my opinion that we should take another look at this. So, I think Roberts has already summarized Keynes's International Clearing Union. There was another player involved in this who never got a hearing, but he did make a proposal to the Bretton Woods conference. I guess it just went to the US Treasury and got lost. But Benjamin Graham and Frank Graham in 1944 made a proposal and submitted Hayek's article on commodity reserve currency, as well as Ben Graham's book, World Commodities, World Currency, in draft form, as well as their proposal, which was signed by 100 signatories, including Marshak from the New School and some other academics, and mostly Wall Street gentlemen. And it was Graham's concern that we really need to somehow make surpluses something that is seen as a treasure rather than seen as something that is bad. So in their proposal, which was basically written by Ben Graham and Frank Graham, they proposed that they should have an international commodity reserve currency. And their basic 4 points was that we should stabilize a real exchange rate so that manufactured goods, the export of manufactured goods would be priced relative to commodities, that those commodity prices would be stabilized. And as opposed to Keynes's proposal, where he was stabilizing individual commodities, they would stabilize them in an index, and therefore they would have 15 to 30 to 60, as many commodities as they could that are standardized, homogeneous, storable. You can use proper inventory methods, rotation, etc. That you would create a buffer stock and stabilize those prices around some international targets based on world prices of individual commodities. Create an index, stabilize that, and basically do open market operations in those basket of commodities, injecting reserves and buying commodities to stabilize that price. They also felt that just the existence of these buffer stocks should be a good thing, because that means there's ready resources there for industrialization. The buffer stocks would be as a percentage of world trade and world production. So there would be this idea of input-output. The needs for manufacturing and industry needed these essential goods. So if we have them in a ratio that is already traded each year, and that this would promote world growth. Nicholas Kaldor also followed up this idea. In 1964, he made a proposal with Albert Hart and Jan Tingberg and presented at UNCTAD in the first meeting of UNCTAD. And Kaldor thought it was a bit rich if developing countries would say, if the developed world would say, well, we don't need stockpiles of commodities. The market provides it fine and we don't need any extra. He thought that was a bit rich, given that if you consider how backward or underdeveloped the majority of the people are in their rural societies and in developing countries, that the amount of industrialization that's required to bring those countries up, you do actually require a large reserve of resources. And so this should be really a consideration. So this is just an example of some commodities that you might use. There are suggestions that you could add other components to this, like carbon permits. You could even have a proportion that was of green technology, maybe some growing percentage over time. And that you would create this index of commodities as wide as possible. And it would be stored mainly in the vendor locations and audited and transparent, and that everyone could see exactly how many reserves are in the system. And that this system would be the buffer for the private system. So the private market would continue producing its commodities as it would at this price that would be stabilized within some percentage range, 10% between the bid and the ask, or 20%. And these would be stabilized, the index would be stabilized, but the actual individual prices of all of these could float, could be flexible. They would be determined by supply and demand. So it would just be the backing of this international reserve by this basket. And in the back of my paper, I have some trying to elaborate how this could be practically implemented, some balance sheets just to show the flow of reserves between banks, between participants, and how the accounting would work if one was to do that as an international reserve. So, I think I'm missing a slide there, but that's okay. So basically the similarities between the Keynes, Graham, and Kaldor plan. Keynes was stabilizing individual prices of individual commodities. And he and some of his colleagues at Cambridge felt that this was really key along with Keynes's international monetary reform. They thought it was key mainly because it would be a stabilizer to smooth the business cycle. It would also offer free and equal access to raw materials. It would anchor commodity prices, which they saw as highly volatile. And if we look at the statistics, this is only increasing over time. So the volatility of these things is not declining. And there's a simple reason for that, and that's basically because of the inelasticities of supply and demand of commodities. So if we compared that to manufactured goods, manufacturing have a much more elastic supply and demand. So it would provide an automatic, okay, these two slides are around the other way, but it would provide an automatic stabilizer. So the main point is that they're going to be buying commodities, injecting reserves, providing income for the producers of those reserves, of those commodities. That means developing countries and developed countries. Not only the people, the farmers, the miners who are receiving those reserves are getting a stimulus, like the gold standard. When you buy the gold, South Africa would get some sort of income and help stimulate the system, but which was minor. In this case, we're talking about a stimulus, a world stimulus for a vast number of people because the prices are now stabilized. And so it would promote investment and really promote agricultural-led growth and to try and it's really to give some surplus to the commodity producers, because a lot of times it's the consumer that benefits from the surplus, that the productivity levels of agricultural production and rather than the producers. So just the differences between Keynes's proposal and the proposals by Graham and Kaldor. So Keynes was stabilizing individual commodities. That means there's a stockpile of an individual commodity run by some governing body. This has to be financed somehow. And if he had his ICU, then it could easily get an overdraft from the ICU in order to purchase those commodities. If there wasn't an ICU, now you depend on donations and financing. There would be, under his plan, fixed exchange rates, but these would be adjustable. And the global imbalances would be resolved through the ICU, through the International Clearing Union, as what Robert mentioned. In the case of Graham and Kaldor, they're not stabilizing individual commodities. They're stabilizing a basket of commodities. So this basket of commodities is backing the reserve, and there's no necessary financing constraint in the sense of the purchase of these commodities. There's no need to get funding for that because you're issuing receipts. The receipts are backing Bancor. So the new international reserve is Bancor, backed by commodities. So you get away from the key currency system. And it also helps to moderate global imbalances. So we're going to smooth the business cycle. So through open market operations, you buy commodities when commodity prices are low. The assumption is that commodity prices are strongly correlated with world growth. So when commodity prices are rising, you're when commodity prices are falling, you're buying commodities, injecting reserves. And when commodity prices are rising, you're selling commodities and taking out reserves from the system. And that this would have a much bigger multiplier than, say, gold or some other commodity-backed system. And it would lead to a resolution of global imbalances. This is really what Kaldor was trying to promote. Kaldor felt that if a country devalues, let's just go to the next slide. If a country devalues, then it should be the case that it raises the cost of its imported raw materials. So by China devaluing, it makes its manufactured goods more competitive, but at the same time raises the costs of its inputs. And now there's a trade-off between being more competitive and the actual terms of trade that it has now increased the cost of imports versus exports. And that should discipline it not to want to devalue. In the world that we live in, when China devalues, other countries, other commodity-producing countries are also devaluing because they also want to export manufactured goods and have an export-led growth. And so because they're all devaluing to the US dollar, China does not face a rise in the price of its commodities. So it is not pressured, disciplined not to do this. We do see now, as commodity prices are rising, that there is this pressure for China perhaps to reevaluate because of internal inflation and the cost of its good. But that has taken a long time to occur. So Kaldor's really, his main point, the mechanism here, is that he felt that manufactured goods must be priced relative to the inputs of their production, and that the country that is most efficient to produce those manufactured goods should be the one that trades, but they shouldn't have an advantage just by devaluing their currency. So during the gold standard, prior to its breakdown in 1913, the fluctuation of commodity prices was much less than it was afterwards. And that is really a pure fact because of the flexibility of the exchange rate. The more volatile that exchange rate is, the more volatile commodity prices are because they're priced in an international currency, in US dollars. And so by having something that is separate from that is based on stabilizing an index and having other goods priced to this Bancor, would help stabilize commodity prices dramatically. And that there's real effects of that. It's not just because of this money, there's real effects. And Kaldor felt that the real effects were the decline in the terms of trade between manufactured goods and commodities. We can see that only really happened after the 1980s with the Washington Consensus, the increase in flexible exchange rates. The Washington Consensus was basically promoting commodity-producing countries to diversify, to seek foreign direct investment, to basically do things. We're trying to get the microeconomic prices wrong, and UNCTAD announced in 2010 that basically by doing that, they got the macroeconomic prices wrong. So And now we see, if you just look at agriculture and manufacturing, agriculture is in the blue line and manufacturing is in the red line. The Prebisch and Singer hypothesis is that the terms of trade should decline over time. And it's really after that, in 1980, that they started declining, after the breakdown of Bretton Woods, that they started declining. Now we see them rising again. It's hard to say whether this is a continued pattern or not, but what Kaldor would have wanted to assist is a stabilization of that over time. So, in conclusion, the idea of this commodity buffer stock is that it's an automatic stabilizer, that it allows for flexible exchange rates in this case. People can have independent monetary policy. It promotes growth through Verdon's law. He elaborates on that, which I didn't have time to go over. It creates a newly held liquid asset, liquid because it's at a set price. And it reduces inequality. It reduces global imbalances through his stabilizing of real exchange rates. And it creates a resource security which can be diplomatically resolved rather than through war. And there may even be room for addressing global warming. Thanks.
Thank you very much.